about, the significance of the name of the diary of Scarface's album. And I was also asking about the actual cover art, what the significance of that would be also, if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, the whole ideal of him calling it the diary in terms of just in a broader scape of hip-hop, hip-hop is autobiographical in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Whether the rapper or the persona is actually telling you stories of his or her actual life or stories that they've seen or heard in the hood. So I think in that respect, the diary is kind of like a metaphor for that in terms of Scarface telling you tales from his own life and life around the hoods of South Acres, which he's actually from South Acres, not Fifth Ward.
Thank you for saying that, Charlie.
No problem, bro. No problem.
The cover art, right, is really, I mean, it's not necessarily
Well, I mean, with the cover art, well, I mean, but you got to understand, if you ever get to know Scarface, Scarface is a very, very introverted but deep thinker, and sometimes he'll, by his own admission, his thoughts are very dark. You know that he's a manic depressive. So in many cases, the album with the ink being spilled is also symbolic of blood that's being spilled. One spilling one's guts, confessing to an extent, because that's what one does with a diary. One confesses.
Right.
And
so it's a metaphor in that respect.
Yeah. And you asked about the religious connotations of it also, and so when I look at it, that album is it's not necessarily the gospel or the good news, but it does place us to understanding what Anthony Pinn calls complex subjectivity. So really, like, how is a black body in a carceral space striving to be within time and space? And so there are these conversations that are happening, and this life that we're learning about on these particular songs that remind me of that can remind you about David after David sins, or remind you of Paul asking, "O wretched man am I, who would deliver me from this body of death?" Or and it doesn't necessarily lead to a salvation or a sanctification. It's to really the thickness of of what it means to live in some really effed up situations, and how we go about negotiating those times and spaces.
Wait, but it also makes me think about the Southern Black church. You know what I'm saying? Oftentimes when you think about Southernness and Black folks, you automatically use the church as a touchstone for trying to understand what that means and what makes that so different. And Langston, this made me think about what you were talking about earlier in terms of when you think about like this dark place, the dark side of Houston. And it's almost as if it's like it's not necessarily a damned place, but it's still worthy of being written into the conversation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right. I think that's what he's doing here. And in fact, on one of those songs, he kind of critiques, the church. I think I can't remember what song that was on, but yes, exactly. I think you have the hood, especially in Houston, as an isolated, voiceless space. It's being in many ways ignored by media in Houston and around the country, not cared after, not shown concern by the Black church and other leadership. So you have Scarface, taking up the role as leader, as captain of the hood, and putting the hood on the map in the sense of, putting these experiences, these dark experiences, on Front Street, in public, so people can experience them, witness them, and hopefully, and I don't know if this actually occurred, work with the people of the hood to change them. So I think that's what he was kind of doing on that record.
Mm.
And you say damn the place. I like that's an interesting word because if we place, these particular hoods, South Acres, South Park, the Dead in Alliance, where he comes from, and fifth, when we put these places in historical context, these are places that I call the left behind communities. Even the communities on the north side of Houston, because as a result of some of the gains of the civil rights movement, we have this not only we have this flight from these communities to places like Missouri City, to places like Pearland, to places where black people were not able to live before, sort of like you have in Atlanta, what we learned through the book White Flight or whatever. And so you have this, what Laura LeQuant calls a hyper ghetto. Not only is it ethno-racial, but it's also almost a single class. So you have, you don't have the doctor and lawyer in the neighborhood anymore. You have this one class of people that are black and brown at schools that are not getting good education. So there's a lot of things going on in these neighborhoods that he's talking about. And so, are they damned? Are they the wretched of the earth? That may be one way to look at it. But what we get, we get this conversation about who these wretched people are and why they would, why good or bad, they make the decisions that they make.
Mm.
I think I want to kind of follow back up on the whole church thing because I had the opportunity to talk with Scarface on several occasions, and one of the things that I do happen to know about him is that, his grandmother raised him. Mm-hmm. So Scarface was raised in the church. And I think I've talked about this earlier with you about the whole ideal of the Southern black Christian ethos, which runs throughout Southern gangster rap. Regardless, even the hardest gangster always has in his thought process, how am I going to square this right with God? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that runs, you hear that theme with Scarface, even when he critiques the church. Throughout the album, you also hear him pleading or dealing with a higher power for redemption, not just for him individually, but for the hood in general.
I'm so enjoying this conversation. I swear I'm taking notes. No, but it also makes me think about, Mako, when you were talking about like the flight, you know what I'm saying, when people were leaving, it really de-romanticizes the efforts of the civil rights movement in the South. Oftentimes when you think about the civil rights movement, it's like, oh, we shall overcome, we have overcome, and it's like, no, not really. We still working through some things. And it makes me think about, just the idea of the violence on the album. Right, and I'm gonna go to Langston first for this one. The violence of the album kind of speaks to this particular type of, not necessarily like a social death, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, like, he really plays around with multiple representations of self-death, of community. What are your thoughts on the way that Scarface kind of rewinds and nuances this discussion of violence into the album?
Yeah, and I think you're kind of familiar with my thesis work on death. I think there's several metaphors of death at play here, and we kind of talked about this. There's the physical death, the ultimate result of interpersonal violence, in these neighborhoods. But there's also, again, a social and a mental death that's going on. I think he talks about that a lot. Mentally, I mean, this community is dead. The first half of the album, No Tears, White Sheet, all those songs, there's no sign of emotion, no sign of love, no sign of feelings. And if you're not doing any of those things, what are you? You're dead, And then comes I Seen a Man Die, And then at the next song, finally, some emotion, you're crying, so that means you're feeling something, you're starting to wake up, And then the second half of the album, you get the sexual songs, the misogynist songs. So though they're complicated, there's still a sense of life, still a sense of feeling there, And on the song, The Diary, it's kind of like he's alive. He's flexing his skills. He's just playing around with, music. So I think he's trying to give us in some ways, a pathway for redemption. You know, we're living dead. You know, we need to die to whatever's, you know, trapping us in this mental, you know, situation, and we need to wake up, you know, and live. And at the same time, again, yes, the community death. I mean, we're talking, that's what we've been talking about, you know, a community without, you know, support, infrastructure, you know, without leadership, you know, without, you know, I guess positive leadership, you know, if I could say that, you know. So this is in many ways a dead community that can be redeemed. So.
You know, what's interesting about that, I think earlier this week or last week, there were these news reports about a study, CDC calling the post-traumatic stress that brothers and sisters experience in the hood, calling it a hood disease. And so, you know, it makes you laugh. It sounds like, you know, the bullhorn racism, scientific racism from the late 19th century and the early 20th century. But you know, what we're hearing through what Faith is talking about on the diary is sort of this post-traumatic stress, this numbness that occurs after feeling years and years of death around you, a dead school system, you know, trying to make it out of the hood, trying to live what has been defined as the American dream, and smoking away and self-medicating because of the pain that you're feeling. So we hear all of this, and on one song he says, "Life has no meaning," and then he comes back and he says that, you know, I never seen a man cry until I seen that man die. And I thought about that. I thought about that in terms of black masculinity. You know, how we're taught to express ourselves. You know, if you fall down or something bad happens to you, it's an opportunity for people to tell you, don't cry, stop acting like a little girl. But he says, you know, a man cries when he's seen a man die, and dying of a death because he's trapped in the
Information has been completed.
And then he talks about how his mind's playing tricks on him still. You know, after 3 years, his mind's still playing tricks on him. And so he's grappling and dueling with, how do I live life in the face of all of this death, and which causes one to want to go crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting that you would say something about mind playing tricks on me, because initially that song was Scarface's song. It was for that particular album.
Yep.
And once Jay heard the record, he thought it would be a better vehicle for the Ghetto Boys. Yep. So he removed Face's 2 verses from Face and added Bushwick and Willie D on it. And of course, that's the record that we know. But the record that you hear on the diary is the actual record that Scarface wanted us to hear.
Yeah.